Good morning. This is History 2463 entitled Assembly of Greater Men and subtitled Le Coup d'État, Fall 2022.
August 31st, 2022 9:11 a.m. Chapter 2. From Article 1 Section 3 we discuss Tennesseans' right to worship.
Right to worship ensured. Named for James Lawrence, 1791 to 1813, a captain in the U.S. Navy during the War of 1812, Lawrence County sits in southwestern Middle Tennessee bordering Alabama on the south. With the resulting racial motivation in Pulaski, Tennessee nurturing the Klu Klux Klan after the Civil War, Giles County houses Pulaski and makes up the eastern border of Lawrence County. Captain Lawrence commanded the USS Chesapeake during a battle with the Royal Navy frigate HMS Shannon in 1813. He is famous for the command, "Don't give up the ship. Blow her up." Doing neither, the ship was taken without being blown up, and Lawrence died of wounds from the battle, but the spirit he expressed in his famous command is as American as the Revolution. America is not just a bunch of laws governing even more people but a national belief. This belief that Americans are both right and good has a foundation in the extra-legal bodies we call denominations. Founded in 1817, Lawrence County was to be a model to follow the spirit of the man it was named after, but a slave named James Lawrence Peterson may have further ensured our state's right to worship.
Well, because government prior to the Civil War for sure was so far away from the reality of everyday life that chivalry was the order of the day, and the greater men were at the vanguard of most every assault in defense of defenseless individuals or parties. As those defenseless are more likely than not removed from those they know who will defend them, even if they lose their life, their belief will not be extinguished. We never know when or where we will transition to our final destinations, and if one is broken, they may prove to be non-resistant, but the hubris of the defeated is the same for one as it is for many with the same purpose. So, attacking one attacks all, but with the distance from the sovereign being so great, order had to be maintained where chaos reigned. Greater men couldn't, knowing the law, allow it to be broken, while the tyranny of the majority often threatened that order.
James Lawrence Peterson, or Saint Peter as they called him, was a huge, massive, towering, gentleman, scholar, slave and greater man. It is still unclear whether he was called Saint Peter because his last name was Peterson, or because he always quoted the Bible. He was such a learned man that his calm and comforting demeanor would never lead one to believe he could ever be a prize fighter, and so humble that he could never be of the greater men. Though he was both, no one knew that he was literate either, as they just thought he had memorized what he had once heard. Being as large as he was, he had a high-pitched voice and rather timid approach where today we might nickname him sarcastically tiny or slim. Aside from Bible verses, he would often repeat, "Don't let them take the ship," not in reference to an actual ship on the sea but the vessel we call our mind. In other words, breaking a horse is mechanical, while breaking a slave is technical, and breaking a greater man is impossible. It is impossible to break a man, because the hubris will hold steady until all we have left is belief. We may only fight for so long, he would say to aspiring young men, while protecting women, children, and elderly with the justice afforded by law.
A carpenter by trade, St. Peter spent most of his days engrossed in whatever project which needed to be completed. He approached every project with the same rigor he would learning, preaching, or proving that chivalry wasn't dead. Not all fights were to be fought, as not all battles may be won, but approaching situations in a similar fashion, St. Peter would begin and end with a word or two in reverence to God. He knew that by doing so he would build up the minority, lessen the majority, and balance himself, keeping him in bounds with mankind. See, there is a task that we all have to perform, and that's maintaining our sanity in a world that is not necessarily ready to receive our gifts as raw and uncut as they are. He couldn't say the same for those outside of his sphere of influence, but those within had full protection of the law as he sought to enforce it. How can one call himself human without some part in the divine, and where else will we do so other than worship?
How else may one truly worship other than through peaceful communication, communal fellowship, and inner conversations between one and one's creator? Whatever produced under peaceful communication is morally right and ethically good. Peaceful communication is moral, because immorality in communication presents an uneasy force that breeds the resistance justice affords. Community fellowship is the substance which caters to the body, where a basic culinary, aesthetic, and economic standard is expected. Food, culinary, clothing, aesthetic, and shelter, economic, are the basics of communal fellowship. Inner conversations between himself and his creator, he would say, guided his conviction in quoting, "Don't give up the ship." The ship could be seen allegorically as so many things: one's mind, the body, the city, county, state, family, country, or kingdom. St. Peter ensured the right to worship where justice was his main emphasis, being at the vanguard of every battle in chivalry's favor.
James L. Peterson was the third of his name, as his father before him and his before him were also thus named. Not only did they bear the same name, but they were also scholars, gentlemen, slaves, prize fighters, and greater men. Greater men participated in the breeding process suggested of literate females in surrounding areas. See, counties were not as solidly defined as they are today, and there was more than enough space to live, learn, and grow in the outskirts. There were more and more who learned to read, and so to increase the interest in being a greater man. The Royal Assembly of Greater Men in Lawrence County thus encouraged the secession of the state from the nation on the grounds that the North was simply reinventing the English suppression of the colonists on the South. Don't let them take the ship was referring to the sovereignty of the state where St. Peter was at its vanguard.
That is all for this session. We will meet again next Wednesday the 7th of September at 9:11 a.m. for Chapter 3. Be thinking about the outline and content of your midterm papers which are due in 2 weeks for your better outcome.